You're listening to The Other 50%, A Herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. And for this episode, I got to speak with Heidi Philipsen. Heidi is an actor, a director, a producer, and is currently releasing her feature film called Darcy that is making its rounds on the film festival circuit and will be screening at the Socially Relevant Film Festival in New York City as the closing night film on Thursday, March 22nd at 8 o'clock. Go see that. Heidi has a very interesting story in that after college, she went to Germany and actually got her start in television over there before coming back to the United States. Now, a gentle word of warning, we do talk about adult themes in this episode, and they're in the hashtag #MeToo genre. So if you are driving carpool right now, perhaps you listen with your headphones in. You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, the merchandise. Please go to the website and sign up if you haven't already. I promise I don't inundate you with emails, but I am going to send some to keep you up to date with what is going on. There's a lot going on the next couple months that I want to keep you apprised of, including we are counting down to episode 100. Now you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbay, and now on Spotify and iHeartRadio. Okay, here's my conversation with Heidi. Have a listen. What is it that you do?
I am a producer, director, and actress, and have just penned my first 2 feature films. So I guess you can add writer to that as well.
So all the things. You're multi-hyphenate.
I am, and I'm a mom on top of everything else.
So you really do it all.
Yeah, I try. I think we just say we're in the action of doing, right? I mean, that's the journey.
That's right.
Anything else? So I guess I'm not supposed to say I try, but I do dabble in a bit of all because I feel that it's sort of all interconnected, you know?
It absolutely is. Now, I want to talk about your latest film, but first let's just get a little bit of background. Like, how did you get into this business in the first place, and how did you know this is what you wanted to do?
Well, I grew up, they say that if you look back to the age of 5, then you kind of figure out what you want to do in life. And that was very much the truth for me. At the age of 5, I was performing, dancing. And then from then on, whenever I got an opportunity to get the neighborhood kids together to put some kind of show together, whether it was a circus, where I then had all their parents come and created a popcorn stand and charged them fees, to doing musicals, to writing little skits, stories, you name it, I did it. And I then went on to be the major sort of journalist for the yearly Christmas interview program, in which I tried to also emulate Barbara Walters and then interview all my family about Christmas. So, you know,
I love it.
It was always play for me. And I guess that's one of those things. I mean, we've all sort of have our route and we've fallen off here and there, but it always came back to this idea of play. And if I could get away with being paid while I was doing it, that seemed like the most amazing thing on the face of the earth. I have had an interesting route in that I had my own sense of girl interrupted. When I was in college, my second year, I was raped. And it was a date rape. And subsequently, I think I went through my own sort of distressful fall from grace. And it wasn't until I was in Europe, Germany, indeed, doing, which was complete by accident. I had some professor who told me my German was so bad I should never go. So of course I went there and ended up after a little bit of a journey, ended up in Berlin, where I was doing English theater. And I'd also done a residency with this political German theater, which was this sort of combination of all the top German theaters, but on a much more intimate political scale. So things like the Berliner Ensemble and the Brechtian Theater and the Deutsches Theater, they had some of the best coming together and just wanted to create and try their own new works. And so I ended up, from a friend of a family of my boyfriend, I followed a guy who's now my husband, and ended up doing my residency there and directing. And from there, that wasn't really paying anything. I was a bit of a pauper. And someone came by and said, listen, I think that they're doing this casting for this weather girl at this major, the equivalent of the German BBC, which is called Deutsche Welle, and I think you'd be good for that. Why don't you try out? And so I got that, and I think one thing led to another, and next thing I know, I was in my what I call my first film school, even though I had studied film theater at the University of Michigan, more on the theoretical value of things. But I ended up covering the Berlin Film Festival in the mid and late 90s, which was wonderful for me because at that point in time, not a lot of people were from the States were coming to Berlin yet. It was this wide open frontier. And if you spoke German, you had all the German connections and had gotten your foot in the door in the industry there. But at the same time, we're American like I was and happened to not be hard to look at. Wonderful things were at your call. So I ended up interviewing the likes of Paul Thomas Anderson at the beginning of his career and George Clooney when he was out there for The Three Kings and Jamie Foxx and Michelle Yeoh and Oliver Stone and Schlondorf. And I mean, the list goes on. And that was the second sort of, I guess, tier of my film school upbringing because I got to ask real actors, really, really, really successful actors and directors and producers what made them tick.
So as an American in Germany, did you have an on-camera journalist job?
Yes. And that, yes.
In German?
Yeah. No, in English, actually. Because this program, the Deutsche Welle, broadcasts worldwide in English, Spanish, and German. So my first part of my job was all about getting the German weather report, translating it into English, writing into copy for the teleprompter, and then putting that together. I mean, that was my first job there.
What an incredible experience.
Oh, it was amazing. And I have to say it's hilarious because at the time I literally knew nothing about how to be a weather presenter. I would remember that one film that was with Michelle Pfeiffer about being a weather presenter where she was like, oh my God. So I would watch that over and over and over again just to figure out how to do it because I had no idea what I was doing. And then every day I would go to the local weather station and time myself in translating this. I mean, this was before, of course, we had computers everywhere. I mean, internet was fledgling still. We absolutely had no social media. There weren't even cell phones. So this was all just complete chutzpah and not knowing any better. And thank God, because it just created a lot of opportunities for me. I remember I spent my last money on going to a hair salon just so I could feel that I looked the part. And then I ended up wearing this really, really odd pink suit in front of a blue screen, which ended up being horrid. So for whatever reason, they liked me. And, I learned a lot about working with British who have no sense of humor when it comes to the weather because I was having fun, quoting John Denver and saying, we've got a Rocky Mountain High. And they were like, Heidi, we're really not going to be doing any humor at all. It's not good if it's sunny in the Sahara. So, so that was my first go. And then, of course, when I found out that the Berlin Film Festival is coming around, I begged the chief editorial there if I could please just do anything. And they ended up putting me with this Marlene Dietrich, a woman who she reminded me of Marlene Dietrich, but she was a pro and she had been at it forever. And she was my first major mentor. She just stuck a microphone in my hand at this major party with more VIPs than I'd ever seen in my life and said, get out there and get your interviews. And that's what I did.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, now at some point you transitioned into being a filmmaker. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think I had always been dabbling a bit in college. Of course, we didn't necessarily have film at the level I was doing it just yet. So it was always sort of like video. And then all throughout the time, I was trying to do little projects here and there, but never really considered myself something serious. And I think ultimately all I ever really wanted to do was act. That was my first love always. But the issue that I kept on running into was these roles, having had gone through the sexual assault I had been through. I had no interest in playing sex kittens or anything like that. And that just seemed like, especially at the age I was, that seemed to be all there was out there. So I set about just sort of writing what was initially a play that my then boyfriend, now husband, said, I really think maybe this would be a good short. And that was a little 16 millimeter film called Angel Inside, which was my first endeavor at putting something together. And then I acted in it too, which was fun. And
what was that film about?
That film was about this American girl in her 20s in Berlin who was sending a video gift home to her parents via videotape. You have to remember the times. This was in the 90s. And in the video, she's trying to act like everything's great in her life, when indeed just before she had an abortion. She had found out she was pregnant on her own out there in Berlin, and she had an abortion. And it was sort of an experimental, surrealistic take on that experience. So, today would I do it the same way? Maybe not, but it was really great for getting it out there. And I think ever since then, what's really been appealing to me is that intimate yet visceral experience of a woman, in ways that mainstream society doesn't necessarily know yet, because we haven't been given permission to tell our story fully.
Right. And I'm hearing more and more women say, I had no interest in the roles that are being presented and being written, so I'm writing my own. And it feels like we're at the place where we're a little bit done waiting for permission and we're just going to do it.
Yeah, well, I think for those of us, and I've listened to some of your other podcasts, and they're fabulous. And I think what I got from those as well is, and what the different mentors and people I've met in the industry is that we can't. That's, we're no different from men in that we don't tick any differently. This is what we do. This is our lifeblood. I can't do anything as well as I can do this. And at some point, if you take the water away from me, I'm going to thirst. And so I'm going to end up coming up with my own ways to make happen what really fulfills me. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And for me, it's no different. I don't want to stop acting. I've got better acting chops than I've ever had in my life. I'm over 35. What is that supposed to do for me?
Your career should be over by now.
Oh, totally. And I refuse to let it be, because this is my one life. And I just feel like, if I have the abilities and the education and the connections to make something happen, why not?
Yeah. And women in the world, many of them are over age 35, and shouldn't we see that on screen?
And we don't stop living after that. That's the thing, though, too, that you realize as you do more of the storytelling, and I guess that's why I like wearing so many different hats at different, not necessarily all at once, but at different times, is you start to see, okay, now I get it. Now I understand. If a guy's wearing the hat as the director and the writer, it's going to be about him. It's his story. That makes total sense. So, of course, any woman's going to be a sideshow, and it's not going to really deal with like that person's needs, because it's not interesting to him. But then it's like, okay, let's turn it on its head. Let's take the coin and completely flip it. And then there's my life and my story. And, I know there's tons of women who want to hear that. And then, gosh darn it, there's men out there who actually are really curious about that as well. Because, after a while, you can only see the same story told, over and over and over again, to the point you're wondering whatever happened to the other side. So,
exactly.
As pointed in your wonderful title, The Other 50%, there's that whole other realm of content. And from the pure business point of view, it seems to me that people would want to be diving into that, because it is content, right? It's content that hasn't been covered.
Right. And there's a whole world of stories we haven't even begun to tap into.
Exactly.
So tell me about your current film. Is it Darcy?
Yes. So Darcy, and I can't take total credit for Darcy by myself at all, of course, as any director can, but this is not my first solo directorial feature. This is a feature which I co-directed with a man, and his name is John Russell Kring. And I really suggest that experience for everyone, whether you're going to go on to do your own solo directing or not. For me, it was a great first experience with a feature. Especially with this topic, because working with a man, and you're working with character actors and these characters who are male and female, and very, very strong characters in the story plot line, you better be sure you know what you're talking about in terms of their motivations and what makes them tick and what they would do or what they wouldn't do. because you can't get that wrong. So that was good. That was really good to have this visceral experience working with John and hitting the ball back and forth in terms of, okay, well, this 15, almost 16-year-old Darcy would do this or wouldn't do this. And this guy named Luke, who's 28 and actually a pedophile, well, would he really do that or not? I don't know. You tell me.
Okay. We haven't actually talked about what the film is about, but I'm starting to get a hint.
Yes. The film's complex, but in a nutshell, it's about this 15-year-old named Darcy who lives in a motel on the edge of town on the wrong side of the tracks with her parents who are trying to run it in desperate economic times. And the sort of societal outcasts that come to live there because they can't afford anywhere else to live. Darcy, in the midst of all of this, is trying to figure out who she is, as many 15-year-old girls do, becoming more headstrong, becoming less likely to want to be patient and go after her dreams. And unfortunately, it also makes her more vulnerable in her attempts at trying to figure out who she is and also waking up sexually, who she wants to be. And she runs across this guy named Luke, who seems like he's there to help, but then, ends up taking advantage of certain moments of trust. So that's the story.
And so is it her coming to terms with what all that means for her?
Yes. And it's also a film that doesn't say that everything ends up in a happy ending, right? So, I think like a lot of, not to jump tracks completely, but a lot of women who were once girls who have been sexually abused or assaulted were done so around that age. Uh-huh. And it was a time where they were very vulnerable and trusting and looking for someone to help them out and not really reading the cues. And then they were taken advantage of. And whether they like it or not, you have to go on with your life. But there wasn't a lot of exploration from the female perspective as to how those things are laid out. And of course, we have films like Lolita, right?
Right.
And now in society, we're going through all of this Me Too and Time's Up movement. And I was just reading in the Associated Press last night, all of this in terms of various directors out there, including very well-esteemed directors such as Woody Allen. But, I think it's a really, really complex topic and one that we haven't touched for a very, very long time because it is so sticky and hard and full of pain. But this film takes it on. And it takes on how a girl, people are always asking, how can that happen? How did you not see the signs? Well, this particular film shows how that does happen and how you don't see the signs until it's too late. And then how you do blame yourself for something when it does happen.
Well, it couldn't be more timely with the national conversation that we're having. And just to put it in context, this week, we're all talking about Aziz Ansari and what that whole encounter means and everybody's perspective on every single side of it. And it feels like we're kind of moving along the conversation from, we started with Me Too and monsters and horrible offenses. And now the conversation seems to be moving towards more, as you said, more complex interactions and how it affects, I was going to say women, but people really long term, and how people try to navigate within, situations or dates or whatever they're within and what the different gradations are of behavior. I mean, it's so complex and so much that we're now just starting to unpack and talk about.
And I think it's wonderful that we're finally doing it. I don't know that we're going to find answers for a while because it's not one of those things that you easily find answers if you're going to be turning away from it all the time. And yet it's so intense that you need to turn away every once in a while for a breath of fresh air. I mean, I'll give you a case in point in my own life. I've just only now, after looking at this, my life, figured out that how did I end up in Berlin, right? I was raped in college. I ended up in Berlin. I ended up in the one place where it was acceptable in the society to have the shame, the collective guilt for what was done. And I did that because I had my own shame and guilt from the act of being a victim, even though it wasn't mine to carry. But I felt that I didn't belong in a place where I could be easily forgiven, even though it was through no fault of my own. This is the kind of crazy stuff that happens when you're a victim of sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And I think it's triggering for many people. Seeing this in social media for me has been triggering. And therefore, I applaud all of those women who, I mean, it's hard enough if you really have nothing to lose, but if you've also worked your way up to a point where you've dodged all the bullets, right? And you've gotten your career to the point where a lot of women in Hollywood have, and they're being brave enough to come out and say something. I think those are very, very strong warriors indeed. And I do hope that we keep, and I guess it's through podcasts like yours that we keep pushing to make sure that it's not for nothing, right?
Yeah, it does feel like this moment is different. And that it does have more momentum than I've seen ever, really. Does it feel like a watershed moment to you?
It does. I mean, looking back over a lot of the documentaries of the women's movement in the 1970s and such, where we were so close to the Equal Rights Amendment, right? That felt like a watershed moment too. And I think what we have on our side are things like social media. I think also what we have on our side is that we have a lot more women in the workforce than ever before. And we have a lot of women, quite frankly, angry at the treatment that we've been receiving. I mean, look, we're talking about film schools, right? A lot of the women out there who are directors have gone to very expensive film schools, and they don't need to be mentioned. Yeah. I'm curious, if they're only getting 7% of the jobs out there in the industry, did they only have to pay 7% of the tuition rate?
Good try.
Right?
No.
Right? And so there's a frustration once there's that wake-up effect. Like, wait a minute, we've been completely duped. We've been completely used. We are really little more than just some kind of serving mule in the whole system. And we're stronger than that. Why are we putting up with this? And even over the last 4 years, just to see that women, what I want women to finally realize is, and I can speak to this because I'm a mom myself and I run the entertainment household, right? Mm-hmm. I run the economic purse strings, and I think we have to look at these things economically because that's going to pull us through on every other aspect, whether emotional, developmental, or otherwise. I control the economic purse strings for the entertainment value in my family. Yep. And when I realize the power in that at the box office or elsewhere, whether it's on YouTube, Hulu, what have you, then there's a reckoning in that, right? So I can make a difference. And we started to see that a bit if you recall, they were like really having a huge movement behind watching Wonder Woman, right?
Oh yeah.
And there was that lawsuit by this Albany attorney who sued this tiny Texan movie theater that was just having Women's Day for, and you can see a little bit of bucking against that. But that's also just showing how powerful we really are. And once we see it, then it's sort of like, why have we not seen this all this time? So yeah, I do believe that you're correct. And that, thank goodness for the whole spectrum of generations of eras within these generations, right? Whether it's our millennials, our upcoming Generation Z, or our baby boomers, they're very, very fierce women across the board. And I think we're only going to be more fierce once we start communicating more and more with each other and seeing our own strength in numbers.
That's what it is. It's recognizing our collective power, which if we just get it all going in the same direction, it's going to be very powerful. And I'm also noticing, I'm going to a lot of events here in Los Angeles, and if there's ever a big group of women together, and I've been in a couple Q&As where the rage of the women is palpable. As they stand up and ask questions, the questions are always informed with really rage.
Yeah.
For no better word for it. And I'm curious to see, because you're also seeing at the same time, the backlash is coming just as quickly. And people, I think, are feeling empowered to have a backlash against the backlash. So there's this constant back and forth. And I'm curious to see how we're really going to transform that rage into positive movement forward. Because we can't live in the rage and really make progress, I don't think. I think it has to be the impetus for how we're going to make this all better.
I think it has to be tempered by policy, right? I mean, I think legislation and policy and goodness gracious, Equal Rights Amendment would be extremely helpful in regulating all that. and letting us know where the line is. I think that will do it. In the end, it will find its equal measure. But here's the thing about that. Even if this is happening in the United States, we still have the rest of the globe to cover.
Right.
Where I don't think we have any room to be bored at this point, you know?
Oh, there's plenty of work to be done.
I understand exactly what you're talking about, the backlash against backlash. I'm also seeing that certain people are being raised up as poster women, whereas that's supposed to fulfill or be the ultimate prize, right? Whereas I think we need to really make it equal across the board for everybody and not just kind of raise up one or two women that, and that these women don't even necessarily want to be up there, because you know what happens to a woman that's been put up there, she ends up being martyred like the Joan of Arc. So, I think that hopefully enough of us will be saying, listen, we really just need to be backing this up with policy and allowing that policy to govern a lot of these new steps in the same way our Constitution is hopefully backing us up in the United States right now.
If you could envision what policy might get us going in the right direction, what would you say?
Well, I mean, one thing, yes, the Equal Rights Amendment. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing is at the universities where we are paying rather large tuitions, why are we not making sure that women such as Alice Guy, right, Blanche, are not being discussed more in the volumes of education, which these male professors are telling women how to write, how to direct, how to act. This is still across the board, often male, just basically. Just
women aren't in the canon.
Yeah, exactly. Put, because we're out there. They just need to be put in the textbooks, right? So, I mean, I think that's another thing. What else? Yeah, if we have to do quotas for women in the workplace and in the industry at first, then let's do it. Because the truth of the matter is it is an equal representation in the storytelling. It's not the whole story. So that in itself seems like it's, I don't know, just not right and not fair and not equitable. So those are just a couple. I think then we have to cement them. I mean, they just have to become more and more policy in terms of what's being done right now. I know the Producers Guild of America, of which I'm a very proud member, we have various programs. One is called Culture Shift. Another is the Conscious Bias. And up until now, I think it's been led by Lydia Pilcher. And that's been about finding ways to recognize and do something for producers about discrimination, sexual discrimination, sex discrimination. I mean, even Time's Up, just looking at their website now, they're giving great. So I think those are small steps, and then we just have to keep on pushing until we get them so that everybody agrees to them, not just women.
Are you able to put into words why it matters? Why is it important to have women in the industry?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that as you were discussing with Jen McGowan, this idea of storytelling, right? And leaving a trace on the earth for future generations to understand who we are as human beings. It's part of our existential decree. And if we're only getting one part of the story, then it's not the full story. And if you're constantly building new hypotheses, whether it's in science or in politics or in prose, if it's built wrong because it's not on the full foundation of the story, then it's incorrect building. So alone for the fact that we deserve our part of the story to be told because we've been part of this existential footnote, I think it's also important. I have a son. It's so important that he understands that his mother is not a victim, that she is a very strong and capable individual, and that her society values her, because only through seeing that will he himself value women as well. So on all those different levels. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. I think sometimes it's hard, because we're so in this conversation and it's so obvious.
Yeah.
It's obvious to me, it's obvious to you why women should be involved. Sometimes I just like to let's put it into a few words.
No. And I think there's just, but I'm trying to answer it in terms of like, on the one hand, why emotionally we want it so much, right? We just want to be recognized at the end of the day. It's an equal rights issue. It's just knowing that we're being heard. We want that footprint in the cave. We want that handprint in the cave. On the other hand, it's also, equally important for whatever research or anything that's happening in the next stages we take as a society. Because don't you want to know that the thesis or the hypothesis that you're creating for industry and science are at least based upon something that's true? And if only one part of the story is getting out there, well, then it's not the full truth, you know?
Right.
So for me, I can never understand men who have never been interested in knowing how women think, or who just feel like they're, how you can even subscribe to that we're the lesser sex anymore. It's hard to believe that it actually exists out there, but I guess it still does.
It's pretty absurd. How do you think we engage men in the dialogue?
Well, I think a lot of men are engaged in the dialogue. We just don't hear them because they're not really sure how to speak up to it. But more and more men are speaking up to it. For those who have not yet been engaged, I think we have to speak to their insecurities, because oftentimes it's really just a fear and a lack of self-confidence that makes them feel that they have to step on someone else in order to elevate themselves, you know? So in order to engage with them, on the one hand, if you tell your strictly from the directorial storyteller, if I speak, I'll give you a case in point. So in the film, Darcy, there's a scene where Darcy goes in and she wants to surprise Luke, and she has gotten a new dress, and she's hoping for a kiss. Right. She's been reading these historical romances. She's been reading fairy tales, and she's thinking that he is her prince, and that maybe just a kiss, somehow that will make her feel loved. And through the directing with John Russell Crane, we were both working with both of our actors, wonderful Jonathan Tchaikovsky and Gus Burney, who was indeed 15 at the time. She's now 18. It was her first feature, and she's marvelous. It was interesting because both Jonathan and John, the director and the actor, were like, well, I mean, clearly she wants sex. It's obvious. She's coming into the room, so she totally wants sex. And I would,
oh my God, about a 15-year-old?
Yes, right? Every woman's like, no way, are you kidding me? But they didn't mean it to be.
She has no idea.
She had no clue. But see, the men didn't know that. They were earnestly of the opinion she came into the room. That's what she wanted. She was wearing that dress. She has lipstick on. She must know that what she wants is ultimately sex. And so I could have inserted my own opinion, which I did. And I was like, no, she doesn't. But just in case, I took Gus to the side, and I said, guys, get out. I said, Gus, you've done your research on this character. You know this character inside and out. You're the same age. What is it that you're looking for when you come in here? She says, well, I want to be beautiful, and I want to kiss, but I just want to feel like I'm part of a fairy tale, like I'm the princess. I was like, bam. So every woman knows. And it was a real come to Jesus, or for lack of a better term, a real wake up aha moment for all of us collectively, both the men and the women, in that the guys were like, whoa, I had no clue. I had no clue. I've been seeing all these films. I've been talking to other guys. They always say she wants it. I'm like, no, she doesn't want it. She wants a kiss, dude. She wants a kiss.
She wants romance.
She wants romance. She wants belonging. She's a 15-year-old. She's been reading about this. She's never experienced it. She's looking for, So I think I'm using that as an example, because oftentimes I don't know that. I think we're all stupid until we're educated, right? And I don't think that all men are out there as these evil. I don't think they mean it always. It's just, I think a lot of them just don't know, so you educate
them. And they're
them.
adult men, and they're looking at a girl that looks like a woman.
Right.
So that must be very confusing.
Well, it is. And then they also picking up on the fact that when you're 15 and you start to realize that you have sexual power, and that look at you further than if you're quoting Shakespeare with some guys, then you're going to use that sexual power, right? So that's confusing to them as well. And yes, one would like to think that they're grown up enough to understand, well, you shouldn't play upon that, and don't even just ignore it altogether. But if they also don't know, I mean, I have a 13-year-old daughter who looks like she's 18, right? She's 5'9". She's gorgeous, and she's extremely intelligent. And if most people are really surprised to know that she's not. So I think it's an educational process that needs to be finally lifted. We need to get out of our Victorian and puritanical garb and start to really discuss these things and figure it out. I mean, if I might digress one more time, as a case in point with this film. And that's why I love movie making, because you can educate through movie making. This is why it is important to have female directors, storytellers, writers, who are really wanting to live their truth in imaginary circumstances. We had our film festival premiere at the Twin Cities Film Festival in October. And our director of photography was a female, and our gaffer was a female. And throughout the film, our character, Luke, who is ultimately, in truth, a pedophile, is wonderfully lit. He looks gorgeous, right? And yet we have another character who is a little bit more seedy, and he's always with a lot of contrast, darkly lit. You really get the sense that there's something not right about the guy, although the guy's never done anything wrong in the amount of time that we're watching him. And his name is fittingly Pete the Creep. So we even give a suggestive name, right? Well, in the talkback, the Q&A after the film festival, a guy stood up and asked the question, why did you light this guy this way? Why did you light Luke as if he were the most wonderful guy ever? And then this other guy, and, my male director, co-director, John Russell Crean, attempted the answer, and he and then my other male actor, Luke, Jonathan Tchaikovsky, had an answer, and then finally said, I've got the answer for you. That's how Darcy saw this guy. That's how Darcy saw Luke in this lighting.
Yeah. She
gave him the halo effect. And you should have heard the collective, oh, from all the guys, across the room. I mean, it was a real paradigm shift, I think, for me. And it was that moment where you're like, okay, this is why I do this. This is why I fight to do this, and why I'm not going to take on someone else's predetermined way of doing this, because honestly, maybe I don't want that message in the storytelling to be put out there through the same type of lighting and editing that everyone else has ever done in a male context. Maybe I want it done in the female context. So that's finding your voice in that storytelling. And I think that's how we do it, right?
It's powerful.
It is. And it's totally exciting and heady to be part of it at this time. Right. And I hope more and more women do feel empowered to the next front of the film festivals. When we have programmers who are only looking for one style that's been done forever, then how are we going to get those into the programming of these film festivals? It takes, even women to a certain extent have been programmed into believing there's only one way to tell a story. And that is in a way where you maybe have a female supporting character and the male. And, thank goodness we've got things like the Bechdel test and these other things that are, I think Kimberly Pierce is also working on something that's a whole brand new way of testing and measuring female content. So, we're pushing in all directions. And I think there's hope in that.
Oh, me too. And we have to keep bringing it up at every level, at every gateway, at every single time you can make a choice, so that it's forefront for everybody's mind.
Very much so. I read your piece about how you started, and I'm really impressed and delighted to see that what you thought might start with a couple has led into so many interviews a year later. It's something to be congratulated on. So congratulations to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Look what's happened in the world in this last year.
Yeah.
It's been incredible to be part of this conversation. Tell me, what is next for you with your career?
Well, I think that we're still pushing hard to get Darcy out there in the film festivals.
Where can we find it?
Well, that's a really good question. I think we're waiting on a couple of film festivals right now, so I can't announce them just yet, but I do hope that I will have them to announce to you at some point. And then I also know that we're heading to the European film market with our sales company, Krogan Filmworks, who's looking to sell it worldwide. And so hopefully very soon I'll have good news. Until then, I've got it in lockdown right now, but it's taken us a little bit to figure out how to push this sort of film out there, because I think people were really a little nervous about content like this, what to do with it, and if it's the right time for it. But even in speaking with you, I think it's become more and more clear to me as a filmmaker that it couldn't be more timely. So right. I think my job is to make a movie that I feel is worth telling. And sometimes it fits in the times and sometimes it doesn't. I just feel really fortunate that the times are really ripe right now, and we'll continue to push to get it out there. So, but people can go to our website and ask about it and like it on IMDb and Facebook, and that will hopefully really put that out there to the powers that be in terms of distribution to really get after this film and purchase it. It's at darcymovie.com. Or they can IMDb it and just look up Darcy, or you can find us on Facebook and Darcy Movie or Twitter or anything. We're out there. And
okay.
So there's that. And then coming up next for me is I have penned 2 feature-length films, one called Emily Doe, and another just has no title at this point. But one's a romantic rom-com, and the other is, believe it or not, a 1990s period piece, Gen X. So it's slightly biographical about my first year in college. And I'm looking forward to continue working with that in development. And then I keep acting, I keep writing, I keep being mom,
It's great. And we'll link to all your, I'll put all the links to your film when I put out the podcast, so it'll be on the website and everything. And then if you get a distribution update before it comes out, let me know and we'll update everybody.
I will. Absolutely.
Now tell me, what advice do you have for young women starting out?
First of all, live. Go out there and live. Don't take time and look for some prescribed way of storytelling is ultimately having stories to tell, right? So, in that way, get out into the world and find your footsteps. And I think secondarily is, just because someone says no to you doesn't mean that, that just means that's one person. You're going to get a lot of closed doors, but as my grandmother used to say, there's always a light, in the crack in the door. So look for that, and then understand that it's part of the bigger picture. So I think that's the best. I don't know about film school or not film school. I think there's always been people out there who have made it work because they're passionate about what you do. But if you can find out what your passion is early in life and continue along that path, and then seek others who are in your tribe, as I like to call it, people who are going to be your mentors and supporters, and then do that and treat them like the gold that they are. Because once you have that, you've got everything.
Yeah, once you have your people.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the best.
And if you don't have your people, go look for them, because they're out there.
Go find your people. Are you a success?
Am I a success? Yes, I am, because I've overcome great obstacles to get where I am right now, and I'm still standing strong.
Good. Are you a badass?
I am the biggest badass, yes.
I love that. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to talk about?
We've got a long journey, but I do think that this is a major start, and I'm just thankful for people like you.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me.
It was great to meet you.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Heidi Philipsen for sharing her story, and special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbay, and subscribe and leave a review. And of course, on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out. For added features, bios of our guests, and the merchandise, please go there right now and subscribe. And we are also on YouTube if you prefer to listen to your podcast there. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter at Other50% and Instagram at Other50% Podcast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.